What's going on, everyone? I've wasted tens of thousands of dollars, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars on the exact problem that I'm going to solve in advance for you in this video. It's on hiring, when to hire, how to hire, some foundational concepts behind hiring like revenue per employee and a few others. And generally, I just want this to be your hiring end-all be-all, no bullshit for entrepreneurship or really whatever path you're going down. So if that sounds like something you want to fix, then stay tuned and let's get into it. So I've appropriately named this document, which is going to live on my blog, Why the Vast Majority of Hires Are Pointless. Now, I don't mean to do this because I want to be inflammatory or clickbaity, although that obviously helps with engagement and that sort of shit. But it's true, the vast majority of hires that I have seen at 7- and 8-figure agencies are totally pointless. They do basically nothing for the organization. And realistically, if the business owner had known a couple of things that I'm about to show you in this video, they probably would not have made that decision. And so what this video is going to be is it's going to be a deep dive into hiring. I'm not really going to look as much into the philosophy as I'm just going to look at like how to actually make the right hiring decision. We're going to learn a couple of like key metrics that you should be tracking, maybe some simple structured management if this is your first time going into like a management type role or hiring people or having people work under you. But do not hire somebody until you make it to the end of this video, please, because I work with tons of 7- and 8-figure companies, cannot tell you how big of a bloat percentage of their payroll is just going straight into the trash right now. Okay, great. So why the vast majority of hires are pointless? Number one, it's because you don't know your revenue per employee. RPE is an extremely valuable 3-letter acronym that I think more companies should personally spend some time looking into. Essentially, it means if you are making $1 million a year and you have 5 employees, well then your RPE is 1 million divided by 5 equals 200,000. Pretty simple when you explain it that way. However, that simple concept eludes probably 90% of agency owners out there. Like if you think about it logically, the purpose of a business is to produce revenue, right? And the purpose of you hiring staff is to assist you in the generation of that revenue. I think some people at this point are probably going to be like, oh, well, no, the purpose of this guy is to like help maintain the back end or whatever. But by maintaining the back end, he's doing what for you? Well, he's allowing you to continue producing revenue and potentially increase the rate at which you are producing revenue. So logically, every time you hire somebody, you should be adding to your bottom line. Now, the issue is a lot of the way that hiring works today and a lot of the way that hiring has actually been done for a while, but specifically today with like remote work and you being able to start a business by just going on Upwork and making a client account and like getting a team of 10 people under your belt, is basically there's some problem in a business. And so the business owner all of a sudden has a need. And then instead of thinking logically through how to solve that need without hiring, the very first thing the business owner will do is think, oh, I have a need. I should hire somebody to take care of it for me. This, unfortunately, is this organic approach basically is like backwards. It's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. And it lands staff in some really hot water when it comes time to like discuss performance and shit like that. So you're not really doing anybody any favors by using that hiring structure. A better way to hire is to anticipate needs in advance, to know exactly how much utilization each staff member on your team currently has, can currently take, and when you need to hire somebody else, and to make sure that every time that you hire, you're hiring because it's the last thing that you have to do, right? Not the very first thing that you should be doing. It's like the last alternative option, and you're like, fuck, I guess I really gotta hire for this. So, revenue per employee, the reason I bring it up is because it helps solve all of that. Just by thinking consciously through what your RPE is at any given point in time, you're usually able to, both just like center your priorities and just understand, okay, like, listen, if I'm hiring an account manager for my business, like how much money should that account manager realistically be making me, right? I'm not going to move forward until I figure that shit out. So I've written some guidelines over here. They're pretty straightforward. The first is if you don't know your RPE or revenue per employee, calculate it now. Super simple to do. You just take your annualized revenue divided by your number of employees. So I have a cute little sketch pad over here. Let's say, I'm making 80K per month. What we do is we multiply that by 12. And my math ain't so good, but I think 80 times 12 is 960K. So 960K is our annualized revenue. And let's say we have 6 staff members, right? So what we do is we divide 960K by 6, and then we end up with 160K each. So our revenue per employee is now 160K. Now what you can do with this RPE figure is you can further use it in additional calculations to determine what's called like your return on employee or like your ROI per employee. For instance, let's now say that for these 6 people, you're spending an average of, I don't know, $60,000 a person. So now if you divide 160 by $60,000, what you'll get, if you just forgive my shitty math here, is you'll get basically like a revenue or a return on employee of 2.667. And we can just call this like return on employee, or even just, I just like to think of it as ROI. And this is basically like your multiple. For every dollar you spend hiring an employee, you're gonna get $2.66 back. And it's a very simple way of just conceptualizing this. The reason why I bring this up is because if you think about it, like an ROI of 2.67x, like in the grand scheme of things, if we just be real with each other here, that's a pretty low ROI. There are probably a ton of other things that you could do right now in your business to turn $1 into more than $2.67, assuming that you put a little bit of time into it. Also keep in mind that this is a very time-intense procedure. Hiring somebody, you don't just like press a button online and then hiring's taken care of. When you hire somebody, you have to like train them, you have to mentor them, you have to onboard them, you have to have systems and structures in place, you got to deal with risk, with termination and that sort of shit. Realistically, this 2.67, if you think about it, it's probably, after you factor all that shit in, less than 1.5. So, like there are just so many other things that deliver more than a 1.5x ROI. Like if we're just sort of, listing all the things in order, 1.5 or 1.6x ROI is probably over here. And then realistically, there's probably an action you can take right now to get you at least a 3x ROI, maybe on like the sales and marketing side of things, or I don't know, building out some system or copying and pasting my automations, what have you. So just a really simple and hopefully straightforward way of just conceptualizing why hiring should be the last decision that you make, and why you should use revenue per employee to sort of like ground yourself, center yourself, and constantly just be thinking, hey man, like, do I really need to hire somebody right now? Is hiring somebody really the best move? So yeah, that's number one. Now, I also mentioned down here that there are a number of ways to hire today. You don't just hire employees. Like 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's probably more common just to have a team of like 6 or 7 employees that were salaried and in-house, and you pay them a certain amount every day. Today, you have contractors, freelancers, flexible temp workers. There are a variety of other job types that make this a little more complicated, especially for agencies at around the 7, 8 figure mark, because they typically employ a ton of contractors. So what I'd recommend here is if you run an agency and you have a bunch of contractors, you want to apply this to your business, calculate revenue per employee and revenue per contractor differently, because they do different things most of the time, and they sort of have different value propositions and different hiring logistics, right? It's a lot easier to hire a contractor than it is to hire a full-time salaried employee. 1099 versus W-2 if you're in America, or I think like T4 or T4A in Canada. I don't know, man. I don't run a Canadian company. Anywho, yeah, so what that means is, let's say you have 15 contractors for that 960K. Calculate 960K divided by 15 to get your revenue per contractor. Then if you have like the remaining 6 members, do 960 by 6 to get your return on employee. And then just keep track of those 2 figures, adjacently, I guess, and make sure that okay, like the ROE is probably gonna be a little bit higher than the return on contractor just because I have so many more contractors. You don't need to equivocate the 2. And then I mentioned you should have a rough understanding of the RP that you're hiring for before you actually hire for the position. So like if you know that your account manager is going to cost $50,000, ask yourself, how much money do I want this account manager to unlock for my business? Probably at least $200,000. Generally speaking, return on employees nowadays in 7, 8 figure agencies with technology and stuff like that, they can be anywhere from like 3 to like, in many cases, like 6 or 7, depending on if you're augmenting their flow right. Obviously, I'm going to recommend that you go for the 6 or 7 as much as humanly possible. But yeah, if you are paying somebody $50,000, just make sure that they're generating you like at least $200,000, if that makes sense, in terms of like their client capacity and how much they can take on and all that sort of stuff. Okay, great. That's number one. Number two is clearly define daily accountability. This is more of a managerial thing than anything else, and this is something that the vast majority of 7 and 8 figure agencies that I've seen experience really fast growth inevitably screw up on. Because when you're growing really fast as a founder, business owner, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call yourself, your time's extremely limited, and it becomes very difficult to break something if it's not really broken, or try and fix something if it's not really broken yet. The issue with staff is that they rarely chug along and be perfect and then all of a sudden break all at once. It's more of like a slow, inevitable decline in your margins and their performance and their ability to do things and their respect for you as well. So in order to avoid that, what you need to do is you need to clearly define daily accountability practices. It was Peter Drucker that said, you can't improve what you don't measure. And I keep that in mind basically anytime that I'm making a hiring decision for my own company or for one of the many companies that I do operations and consulting with. The vast majority of the time, when I enter a business, their staff, like at least a third of the staff members, they do absolutely nothing. When I say nothing, I mean like in terms of their like actual deliverable output, it's something that you could probably do in an hour, and you're giving them a task for them to do like a whole month. So you could literally, like if you just wanted to say, fuck it, I'm gonna spend the next hour doing something, you could usually accomplish that whole person's month of work in an hour, which is obviously ridiculous. And there's no need to be spending $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 on somebody to do something that you can do in an hour. That's like a terrible misallocation of resources. And obviously your first question is like, well, why the hell are they doing nothing? Axe them, dude, you gotta hire somebody else. But it's not like the business owner or HR manager, whoever hired that person, like didn't understand this. You know, the situation wasn't like that initially. What ended up happening was at the very beginning of that person's tenure with their company, they were doing great. They were probably delivering, 100 times that output. But every month, because you didn't have some structured accountability practice, and basically because you didn't have check-ins and one-on-ones and that sort of thing, the person or the staff member, because nobody likes doing freaking work, or the vast majority of people don't like doing work, every month that they don't get called on something, they're just gonna do a little less, a little less, a little less. I break it down a little more philosophically over here by saying human beings are animals, and like all other animals, we aim to economize our energy usage wherever possible. We're no longer prowling the African savanna hunting predators or prey, but don't think for a second that we're not eventually going to employ similar energy economization strategies in a business. So maybe that's like a more palatable or nice way to say it, but sort of like the pragmatic, or what's the term, sort of like sad way of looking at it is that people will just inevitably decline to whatever you tolerate. And so in companies that don't have structured management practices, don't have like good managers, or just don't have some type of like HR scheme that at least checks in on their performance every once in a while, they will inevitably do absolutely nothing unless they're checked in and called on it. So yeah, in order to avoid that, I'd recommend you clearly define daily accountability practices for your employees, and contractors that are with you and maybe doing more than like 10 or 15 hours a week sort of deal, they should be doing some type of daily accountability as well. What I mean by this is basically every job position that you hire for, like in order to do this in practice, you just want to make sure that you have a set of daily duties. If you're hiring somebody to do your ads, for instance, then make sure that every day they check in on your ads for X amount of time. And then maybe on top of that, they write new copy for an hour. And then on top of that, maybe they review creatives from like the design team for at least an hour. Just make sure that there's some daily practice that that person has to do every day, Monday to Friday, or whatever their work schedule is, whenever they sign in to your business. This is particularly important in remote work. Obviously, if you're in an office, it's a lot harder to do absolutely nothing and get away with it, so it tends to happen less, but the vast majority of you guys watching my videos probably run remote companies or are looking to start a remote company. So yeah, make sure that you just have some type of daily duty. The way I do this in practice is I will estimate how long it takes to do all of my tasks, and then I'll just leave them another 2 or 3 hours on top of that. So if I want them to work an 8-hour day, I'm spending 4 or 5 hours on that task, and then I'm leaving them a 2-3 hour buffer. So that, if there are any overages or any complications with that task, then they still have enough time to do it. And then it also allows me to loop them in on calls or get somebody involved in some other project to maybe make use of a slightly different skill set, that sort of deal. I find in practice this typically works the best. Now, in order to make that matter, right, like daily duties are one thing and they're important, and that'll already take you very far, but you need to implement some type of tracking for each of those duties, and you need to tie each of those duties to some type of deliverable. What I mean by this is, and it doesn't have to be complicated at all, way too many people make this way too big of a deal. If somebody is writing an article for you and their job is to write articles, just have them fill out a tiny form at the end of every day, either telling you how many articles they wrote, or linking you to the pieces that they wrote, or just writing down how many words they wrote. Really simple shit, right? I mean, this takes the staff member less than 5 seconds to do at the end of their workday. But that additional 5 seconds helps save you, realistically, like 30% on that staff member. It's such a high ROI move to just have a simple form that at the end of their workday they have to go to and then fill out. And in my personal experience and recommendations, I would keep this as simple as possible. Keep it to 1 or 2 questions at best. The ROI is going to be done. And then all you need to do is when you or your manager does a one-on-one, if you guys are familiar, is just like a sort of like a routine, regular check-in. You can do it maybe once a week, you can do it bi-weekly, you can do it once a month. There are different implications depending on frequency, but whatever your one-on-one frequency is, it's basically just where you check in and see how the person's doing, if they need any help, if they have any blockers. When you're on your one-on-one with that staff member, with your direct essentially, just compare their performance this period to last period. That's all you have to do. You don't even have to dive in there and start providing structured recommendations or working with them on some performance plan. If you just show them that somebody is watching their output, they'll usually perform a lot better. Again, I think you can interpret this however you want. You can interpret this as you constantly staring over their shoulder and snooping and being like, I'm trying to squeeze every last drop of value out of you. But in reality, human beings are just animals, and animals just perform better when they know somebody else is around, somebody else is listening. So call it whatever you want. I choose to interpret this positively, but it is very important if maximizing performance is one of your goals. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to mention, and I already touched on this earlier, but it's before you hire, make sure that you explore every alternative to hiring. Hire as a last resort, not as a first resort. Now, I bring this up because most entrepreneurs' hiring process is basically, again, I'm busy, have some need, I don't have time to fulfill that need, shit, I gotta hire somebody. Realistically, before you even get to the hiring stage, in the year 2024, with the technology that we have and the software platforms available to us and all the wonderful tools. Man, it's like freaking gay space communism utopia. We're basically there already. It's incredible just how many options that the average person has to fulfill or do a task without a human being involved. Make sure you explore all of them first. I mean, think about the return on investment here. If you just set aside like 20 or 30 minutes and just think through how you can turn that task into something that can maybe be robotic process automated, or maybe delegated to somebody that currently exists in your team, or maybe restructured or whatever, like 70% of the time, you will be able to do that task. And if you think about it, like you were gonna have to spend at least half an hour hiring for that role anyway. I mean, if you're hiring, it's probably gonna take you at least 20 minutes to whip up the job post, right? It's gonna take anybody else in your team a couple hours to get that done. You're gonna have interviews, you're gonna have structured processes, you're gonna have paperwork. Like, why not just pretend that isn't going to happen and you're just not going to hire somebody, and take that time towards solving the problem in some other way instead? Sounds simpler than, it sounds simpler in theory than it really is in practice, but that's what I'd recommend. Next time that a need arises, place an artificial constraint on yourself and pretend that you can't hire a human being to solve it. I joke here that it's because we're all extinct now, sorry. But, really just think, okay, shit, this is something a human being can't do for whatever reason. I need to find another way to solve this problem. Now, what this usually looks like in practice is it looks like you have some task, like write an article or something, and then your whole job is to break that down into a few subtasks and then try and farm out as much as you can of those subtasks to like a robot or ChatGPT or some small micro software company or some shit like that. And by chunking it down, you can usually just achieve much higher profitability if you do inevitably have to end up hiring for that role anyway. I have an example here for you, and this is a company that I'm currently working with. It's an SEO agency. Their main task right now is to like produce articles for clients. They do a ton of other stuff too, of course, but right now it's like, hey, we have 40 something clients right now. We just need to be producing weekly articles in order to fill up some queue. And the way that this company works is at the time of the writing, they have 3 full-time writers, and every time that they hit capacity and they need another, they get a few more clients in or whatever, they just hire another full-time writer. Now, this is an extremely inefficient budget allocation by my recommendation, and I've told the founder this, and I've walked him through a couple of alternatives, and he's sort of leaning in that direction. He thinks he's going to do it in the next few months, but as of present, they still have their 3 full-time writers. What happened about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, is their editor, who's a lovely woman, but she got extremely overwhelmed with all the work that was falling on her plate. And she told the business owner essentially, hey, I think what we need somebody to help us rough draft pieces so that like we can do more editing than we actually do writing, and it'll be a lot faster, and it'll sort of unlock a bottleneck in our business, which is good thinking. But in this case, it ended up being just a total and utter waste of time. What ended up happening is the business owner decided, okay, sure, I'm going to hire somebody. By making that decision, he basically destroyed or like deleted 5 hours of his productivity, which we're going to call worth at least $300 an hour, because he's an incredibly high earner and he's at least worth that to the business, if not much more. He ended up hiring a novice part-time writer for about $2,500 a month. And so, if you conceptualize it, that first month expense was $300 an hour times 5 hours of his time plus $2,500, basically $4K. Now, and he asked me about this, and he asked what I would do, and I was like, don't do this, right? This is a terrible idea. But as consultants go, people don't always listen to our recommendations. What ended up happening is he hired a person, And then within a month, he fired her because there was just no value really being produced, no real difference to the business, and definitely not something that was worth $4,000 that first month expense. What he should have done is he should have taken hiring to be the last resort for that problem. When his chief editor came to him and said, hey, listen, I really think we need to hire somebody, he shouldn't have taken her at face value and been like, oh yeah, you're right, we should hire somebody. He should have been like, well, let me think about this. Are there any ways to solve this problem without hiring? And I think if he had just considered that problem statement for more than 5, 10, or even 15 minutes, he would have probably been able to list like 5 things he could have done without hiring. Now, I sent him some variant of this, what I just pasted in over here, but he could have done any one of these and it would have solved his problem for like anywhere from a quarter of the cost to maybe like 1/40th of the cost, I want to say, I think, if my math is correct. Some of the solutions don't even cost anything. But like, let's think about it. Like, do you really need to hire a rough draft writer? No, he could have, instead of hiring somebody in-house, he could have looked for maybe a productized agency, somebody like me at 1 Second Copy, or Joe Davies at Fat Joe, or a variety of other simple outline or draft businesses. There are hundreds. This is a big industry, by the way. Just look up like rough draft outsource or something like that. And you'll find that tons of these businesses can produce rough drafts who are meant to be rough. They're not perfect, of course, but they can do it for about $15 an article. If you consider that versus the $4,000 that he spent in the first month, for $4,000, you could have produced 266 rough drafts, right? For the same first month expenses that hire took, except the turnaround time would have been a lot shorter because you got a whole team working on it now. It could have been higher quality, who knows, might have been lower quality, but it also could have been higher quality. You wouldn't have to train, you wouldn't have to hire, you wouldn't have to interview, you wouldn't have to do any of that shit. And there would be no liability. Now, in this case, the team only produces about 60 articles per month, so realistically, you can just cut that $4,000 a month expense into 4. And then, realistically, they could have solved all of their problems for a cost of $1,000 a month if they just outsourced this instead of looked for an in-house hire. So that's just one solution. I thought about this for maybe 20 minutes, and I came up with another 3 that I consider pretty good as well. What I did at 1 Second Copy once to solve this very particular exact same problem was I just restructured my team, and I turned a few of them from like writer editors into just rough draft writers. And then I just had them do the rough drafts. You'd think that by transforming some of our editing productivity, or whatever you want to call it, utilization, the total output of the company would go down. But no, it turns out by turning some of our editors into rough draft writers, it actually allowed us to widen a big bottleneck in our business. And then we were able to produce like 10 or 15, maybe even 20% more output with literally the exact same resources. And if you consider that, like our actual internal cost for that was $0. It was just, telling people, hey, we're going to pay you the same, but we want you to do something slightly different because, we have a need right now. So that's what I did at 1 Second Copy. I ended up being about 20% more productive for $0 additional spend. You could have also used an outline platform, something like Surfer SEO, maybe Ahrefs, one of these SEO tools out there, these software platforms that can automatically create outlines for you using keywords. That might have cost you $100 a month. You could also have obviously experimented with ChatGPT. Maybe just train your team a little bit better on how to use ChatGPT to generate an outline, so that in an hour, if you consider like an hour of resource utilization, the first 10 minutes is spent on ChatGPT making a wonderful outline, the other 50 minutes is spent actually doing the editing, like a 1-to-6 breakdown, instead of actually like hiring a specific person to do that work. So the point that I'm making is, by elucidating and enumerating all these points, you just don't need to hire in the vast majority of cases, and usually there is a much better outcome or choice, really, if you don't hire. Instead of hiring being your first call anytime you're facing a problem, try and make it your last call. And I guarantee you, your company is going to be substantially more effective. And not only is it going to be more cost effective, not only is it going to be more cost effective, it's also going to be leaner, but it's also going to be faster. Because when you have fewer people in a company, information disseminates quicker, you have less managerial overhead, you need to loop fewer people into the meeting, you have fewer opportunities for lowest denominators to basically bottleneck your flow. The last thing that I want to show you guys is a little graphic here that I just found from the lovely Jason Lowe, I hope I'm saying his name right, on Twitter. And essentially it is a breakdown of how much the revenue per employee has changed over the course of the last 30 years. This is sort of going backwards. Instead of revenue per employee, it's workers needed at S&P 500 companies to generate $1 million in revenue. But what you see is back in like the 1990s or so, you needed about 7 workers to generate 1 million in revenue. So if you just go 1 million and divide that by 7, that means the average revenue per employee was about 142,000. In the year 1995, it was about 200,000. In the year 2000, it was 250,000. In the year 2010, it was already about 400,000. In the year 2020, it's over 500,000, right? Or 2024, it's over 500,000. So what I mean to say here is, the rest of the world is changing, especially at these big S&P 500 companies where this was mathematically modeled. But the world is changing. If you don't improve your own hiring practices, you're going to get left behind. And with the advent of flexible artificial intelligence, stuff like GPT-4 and Claude and maybe GPT-7 by the time you watch this video, revenue per employee is going to get to the point where realistically you might be able to have like $1 billion business with you and like one other dude, right? So just make sure you're on top of it. Make sure you understand logically and practically what to do next time you want to hire somebody, and you'll be okay. Awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. I wish I had a time machine so I could capsule this and then send it back to myself 3 years ago. Probably would have saved at least $50K, maybe more than $100,000 now that I'm thinking about it. But c'est la vie, you live and you learn. That's why I can produce this video today. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave a comment down below. I'm more than happy to address them as per usual. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks so much.